So now it's my turn. I'm your last obstacle to the lunch. And I will not speak about the labor market. I squeezed into the session, but I will mention employment. I will speak about inequality in companionship, inequality in time spent together. I will look at structural and behavioral determinants of companionship in 5 European countries. And this is joint work with Eva Jarosz and Annalisa Donna. Okay, I think I do not need to convince you that humans evolved as a social species. When our ancestors walked through the savannah, they didn't walk alone. They walked in groups. And in fact, the ability to collaborate, the ability to organize socially was the main asset of this naked, weak monkey human. Our brains have evolved to value companionship, to seek for companionship, to need it for proper functioning. And in fact, there is evidence showing that companionship buffers against ill health and low well-being. However, the patterns of companionship are changing for 2 reasons. The first is technological change. Today, more often than ever before, we are able to work, shop, socialize without physically meeting other people. The second big change is the demographic change. We live in smaller households. We have fewer children than decades ago, than over the whole human history. And, and more people than ever live alone. In the context of these changes, it may come as a surprise that the concept of companionship remains rather invisible for social scientists. There is literature on social networks, on social capital, on network society, on loneliness, but the companionship defined as the mere presence of other people in your physical surrounding does not appear. And our goal in this analysis was to fill in this gap, to document the patterns of companionship across various European countries. We define companionship, as I just said, as the presence of familiar others in your physical surrounding. We distinguish 2 dimensions of companionship: the companionship of household members and external companionship, so companionship of people with whom you do not share the roof. We did this because we expected that the drivers of the 2 types of companionship are probably different. And we knew from the literature that the consequences for mental health and subjective well-being of these 2 types of contacts that we may have with people are different. Okay, we asked 2 main questions. First, we wanted to know whether there is something like inequality in companionship, whether there's social inequality there. How does companionship differ with age, gender, and socioeconomic status? Second, we wanted to know if there is inequality, what drives it? And we focus on 2 types of factors. We consider 2 types of factors. So on one hand, structural factors. So where you are in your life, what is your work situation, what is your family situation, how old are you man or woman? On the other, but the second factor that we thought must be important in this context is individual agency. What people choose, in which activities, in which social activities they engage in their lives. Okay, we knew from past studies that structural factors do shape companionship over the life course. This literature is very scattered. So these are studies looking at very specific stages of people's lives. So we knew that that marriage and parenthood is a factor which, increases the companionship of the household members. When we build families, we spend more time clearly with people with whom we live. Employment, on the other hand, is something that brings us to the other world. Although at work we meet colleagues, these relationships very frequently turn into friendships. We also knew that there is something surely going on in the old age, but old age is not always the same thing. In young old age, when we retire and we get liberated from various structural constraints, we have a chance to increase both the companionship of the spouse, usually, and we also have time to get involved socially. And in fact, in most Western countries, this category will be the most socially active group. However, advanced old age is a different story. That's period when companionship becomes scarce, becomes a scarce good. Yes. Okay. We also thought that, and we expected inequalities in companionship, and we expected two types of inequality. First, we knew that due to gender division of labor, we thought that due to gender division of labor, especially during the family forming stage, the companionship of men and women will differ. So women will have more companionship of household members, whether men will have probably more of the external companionship. But we also thought, and there are reasons to believe, that there are also socioeconomic differences. So something that you can call socioeconomic inequality. We know that from time use studies that parents with high socioeconomic status spend more time with their children. Their marriages are more stable. They have higher chances to remarry. All this suggests that probably a higher socioeconomic status comes what gives you more time with your household members on average. Higher socioeconomic status also comes with different types of work. So a work that is more easy to combine with family life, but also work that is probably more secure. And this may translate into more external companionship. And finally, individual preferences. We thought that they may be a way for people to stay in contact with others despite structural constraints. And we know some instances where it matters. So we thought, we probably know that it happens for women. Although women spend probably more time at home, they are generally more socially oriented. They curate more social relationships in their families. They choose more socially involved employment, etc. And we also thought that it happens for older adults. So in the moment when people retire and stop being so strongly connected through employment with outside world, they resort to activities. They get involved socially. So we had three hypotheses. First, we thought there are major gaps in companionship across genders, education, and income. We thought that these gaps would partly be explained by structural factors, and we thought that they should also be driven by individual behaviors. Data. We used nationally representative time use surveys for 5 countries. So we have here Finland, UK, Germany, Poland, and Italy. I don't know what's your experience with time use surveys. It's this kind of survey where respondents fill in a diary. They have this long table with 10 minutes time slots, and they write what they were doing, with whom they were doing, this activity, and so forth, over a course usually of 1 or 2 days. In this analysis, we included people of 20 years old or older, and we excluded time sleeping, napping, and lying in bed, because for these activities, companionship is, in some countries, is not recorded. Okay, variables. We used 5 different data sources, so we harmonized our variables. To measure companionship, we divided the time spent awake into 3 categories, into time spent alone, time spent with household members, so that's the household companionship, and time spent with other people, people with whom you're not residing, that's the external companionship. Among structural factors, we accounted for marital status, parenthood, employment, income, and education. And among behavioral factors, we focused on activities, the type of activities that people perform, and we wanted to choose social activities. So we took socializing, civil engagement, and religious activities, which is very close to like civil engagement in some countries. And we also accounted for leisure and having meals, which are not strictly social activities, but they are frequent opportunities for socializing. Our method was the Blinder-Oaxaca decomposition, which is a tool. It was a tool for us to decompose the gap, for instance, the gap in companionship between higher socioeconomic status and lower socioeconomic status, into 2 components, the explained and unexplained gap, so-called explained and unexplained gap. The explained gap informs us about the compositional effect. So to which extent the gap is driven by different averages of predictors. For instance, it may be that lower external companionship among women is driven by lower employment rates of women. The so-called unexplained gap informs us about the consequences of different coefficients, different effects. For instance, it may be that the gender gap in external companionship may be driven by the fact that parenthood limits women's external companionship more than men's. Okay, first look at data. Here on this slides, on these graphs, you see the average levels of companionship. This is the household companionship. This is the external companionship for men and women. So men are blue, women are red. And we see a few things. So we see first that the first thing that I see, that we see, I think, is that the patterns of companionship and how it differs across age groups and how it differs with genders is quite similar across countries. We also see that the pattern is quite different for household companionship and for the external companionship. Now, how are these differences? We see that the household companionship starts at the youngest age at relatively low level and grows with time when people form their families, and subsequently decreases, reaches the peak around the age of 30 for women and subsequently declines. For external companionship, the story seems much simpler. That is, we start with a lot of external contacts, and with age, these contacts become scarcer and scarcer. So that's what we see. We also see the gender gap. We see that especially in the period of parenthood, women spend much more time with their household members and less time in external companionship than men do. We also see a gap in older age. Yes, across all the countries. The decomposition analysis informs us about the size of the gap, controlling for age differences and differences across countries. So women on average spend 20 minutes more with their household members. Men spend 27 minutes more in external companionship. Educational differences. Here, as you see, the differences between the lines are not so large. Here, the thick line refers to the tertiary employed people, and the thinner dashed line refers to the people with lower education. And we see differences mostly for women. So in some countries, and this is Italy and Poland, so these are the more gender traditional countries, education makes more difference for women's companionship, equips them with more household companionship, less external companionship. And this gap in external companionship is 37 minutes in average. So that's the gap between higher and lower educated people. And the income gap here, the gaps are not very large, but they are more consistent in that people with higher income have more of all sorts of companionship. So companionship of the household members and also people from outside of the household. Now the results of the decomposition. This part summarizes our results for the compositional effect. So this is the so-called explain part of the gap. And what is interesting here is that the gap, so here we have gap in the household companionship, here's the gap for the external companionship. And what is interesting is that these gaps are mostly driven by marriage and employment. That is, higher educated people and people with higher incomes spend more time on average with their household members because they have higher chance of being married than those who are lower educated and those with lower incomes. The main driver of external companionship is employment. Women have less, spend more time. Women spend less time in external companionship because they are less often employed. And the same applies to educational gap and income gap. So structural position, your position in your family situation and your employment situation largely determines how much time you will spend during your days and with whom. These are very, very strong effects. And interestingly for us, these different levels of companionship across groups were not explained by the differences in activities. So higher educated people have higher levels of external companionship, not because they socialize more, volunteer more, etc. This is not happening. Okay, the unexplained gap. Here, when we look at these results, we thought that these different coefficients actually inform us about mechanisms which create inequalities. And here, as a factor creating inequalities, showed up parenthood. Parenthood has different effects on the companionship for women and men. And it also has different effect of companionship for higher and lower educated people. And these differences explain part of the gap that we observe. The interesting story happens for the activities. Activities do not explain any of the gaps that we found. In fact, their effect is in the opposite direction. They conceal the gap. That is, for instance, women spend less time in external companionship, despite the fact that their activities, their social activities, increase their external companionship more than they do it for men. Which means that activities that people choose tend to equalize these existing inequalities. Okay, the first conclusion. We think that our results show that the companionship may be considered as a dimension of social inequality, and it is shaped mostly by structural factors, by employment, by family situation. The result for employment I find quite important because it shows that it's not only the way we sometimes think of employment as a way to earn money. That's not the way to earn money. It is a way to earn money, but it is also a very important tool to connect us to the broader society. The second conclusion is about the activities. So activities mattered. I didn't show this part of results, but clearly they mattered. People who do socialize more, people who do volunteer more, spend more time in external companionship. This definitely happens. However, different propensity to get involved in activities or different effects of activities do not explain any of the inequalities that we observe. On the contrary, these different effects of activities concealed gender income gaps, which means for us that people may use activities to counteract structural limitations on companionship. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is super interesting, and it's a very important topic. Surprisingly, how little we know about this. So thank you for sharing. I'm Ekaterina Operina, London School of Economics. I was wondering, so you showed us two types of companionships. Are they substitutes? Is external or household companionship, do they contribute in the same way to the quality of life? Because you show that there are gender gaps, that men spend more time in external, women in household. Is it a problem? Should we fix that, or shouldn't we? And if we should, is there the policy implications?
We do not know very much still about these links, but the results that I know show that the external companionship contributes a lot to positive affects. So like you kind of, probably because you also do different things when you're at home, you rather do like more boring things with your household members, and the things that you do with your friends are often much more fun. So yeah, we think that external companionship is particularly important.
A small question. Do you control for the number of work hours?
Well, we control for the employment status. So whether people are full-time employed or part-time employed.
Hi, great presentation. My question, I guess, is more about like future work. I'm wondering about what it looks like, or if y'all have considered connecting these findings then to subjective well-being measures. Like I'm wondering, like, how do people think about this, right? Like how does it shape their quality of life that these gaps might exist in companionship?
Yes, that's exactly what we want to do in the next paper. So like we wanted to do it in the first paper, but then we realized, okay, like we know nothing about companionship. So like we need this one first. Then in some, not in all data sets, in the Polish data set, we have life satisfaction, and we have also momentary evaluation. So like people say, was this activity pleasant or unpleasant or neutral? So we want to use this like momentary evaluations and overall evaluations of life satisfaction to discuss the role of companionship. And it's also nice, this data, because it allows us to think about the experiences that people expect to get like later during the day, or the effect of some activities that may not be only momentary, but may like extend to the future. So I think this is nice data. It's we do not have this information for all countries, but definitely for Poland we have. Thank you.
Sorry to keep you from lunch. On the gender gap within household time spent together, most couples will be heterosexual, And so there would be this mechanical association, right? Between genders of time spent together, right? So most of that gender gap must either come from time spent with children or with
Or other family members, yes. Yes, but like in practice, these are children. Huh?
So, but even
Especially
if-
like in like people's like 30s, 40s, this will be children, because this is what households currently consist of, a couple with children or without.
because I think I saw that also for people where you would expect children to be out of the house, there was still this fairly large gender gap.
Yeah, but then older age, like the gender gap reverses. So like for men, this household companionship is higher, for women is lower. And like these are the widows, huh? These are the
So
widows.
it's okay.
Yeah.